Good morning, Sarah. Thanks for making the time to be here.
No, it's absolutely a privilege to be here. So thank you for inviting me.
Just for people that are listening, I reached out to you a couple of weeks back on LinkedIn because I thought this work that you were doing is super interesting. I have been watching stuff and reading stuff about the prison system and the education system and how closely they are linked, and that pipeline is actually quite influential on each other. And both those structures come from archaic times, like they're from times that before you and I were born. And so it's always been on my mind to think about how could we better improve not only those structures but generally in society, the old structures that still stand from the industrial age and even prior to that. Like, how do we shift mindset? And I saw you doing a lot of work in that space, so I thought it'd be great to have a chat. So yeah, I thought it'd be really interesting to just get into some of that stuff, because you've been doing it for, what's it, the last couple of decades now, would you say?
Yeah. So I started in 2004. So that's when I first entered my first prison, and yeah, it's kind of grown from there, really.
And what was, I guess, what would be interesting to kind of begin with is, like, what interested you in that kind of work from the get-go? Like, did you go into studying with that intention of going into then prisons and schools and things to change that, or was that something that happened later on down the line?
Yeah, so I think I've always been just fascinated by people and just loved psychology. So I kind of had that as a kind of young kind of teenager. And then I grew up in a very kind of white middle class environment, didn't really understand, or have any exposure really in terms of kind of minority groups or poverty or any of that. So very sheltered, I guess. I then went to a very busy city in England to work in a 108-bed hostel, which was for young people. So that was 16 plus people that were basically at risk of homelessness. And it really just opened my eyes. I just grew a real passion to support people, to help them grow, to help them develop. And from that, I'd done my degree in psychology and then decided to do my master's in forensic psychology. So with that, I was introduced to prisons, and a prison job came up. I knew nothing really practically about prisons, just that it could be just a really interesting job. So early 20s, went into my first prison, and it was really tough. The staff gave me a really hard time. And yeah, it was just a place where I just kind of thought, this isn't a place where people rehabilitate. This isn't a safe space. This isn't an environment that is calm or nurturing or growth focused. So I left it quite soon. I left it quite quickly, and kind of didn't really feel I had a voice. I kind of thought, you know what, one day I'm going to come back and I'm going to change it. I'm going to make it better, and I'm going to get all the skills that I need and all the experience that I need and throw myself into that in order to be well informed and to have something to say, I guess, because I did have something to say, but I just didn't have that confidence, I guess, at early 20s. So went into work in therapy, worked with people in the community who committed offending, and loved that. Just really enjoyed that kind of therapeutic space that we kind of carved out in those sessions. And then a job came up as a senior academic, and I remember going into my group of guys that were on the program and said, look, I've got this job, coming up. I don't know what to do. And they said, you've got to go. You've got to climb this ladder to make a bigger impact, Sarah. That's what you've always wanted to do. So I joined the university, and with that, I guess the rest is history, in the sense of I started teaching penology, so the kind of the study of punishment, and went to Norway. And Norway was just an utter game changer for me. I remember stepping onto one of the prisons there called Bastoy, which is like an island prison. It's in a lot of the kind of documentaries. And I've never felt such a sense of peace and trust really thick in the air. A space where people grow essentially, a sense that a place that's quite normal. You didn't know who the prisoners were. You didn't know who the staff were really. And I grew there. I had a space, first time away from my children, away from my husband, foreign country, doing research, and I had a massive identity shift at that point. And with that was just like, this is what I need to do. This is my calling, I guess. I'm going to go back to English prisons, and I'm going to change them, and I'm not going to stop in England. I'm going to go large. So yeah, so that's kind of my backstory, I guess, in terms of how I got to this kind of point, set up my own business, and yeah, went back into prisons, and I'm doing the job I love.
And where was that first prison that you worked in your early 20s in the UK?
Yeah, so it was in Winchester. So it's a remand prison, overcrowded, really run down, classic Victorian design, absolutely broken inside out, both psychologically and physically, really, and remains that, not only for the people that live there, but the people that work there. So yeah, it was.
What was some of the red flags that you saw, like when you walked in there, that you thought, actually, this is like, wow, this needs to change? Like, what are some of those things that you typically see? Because the people who are listening, and generally, like, you know, the people around the country don't usually step foot into a prison. It's not something you do day to day, like unless you have family or friends that you're going to visit. But that's not the vast majority of us, at least not in my circle and the people that I know. So, out of curiosity, I wonder, kind of, when you walk in there, like, what were the things that stood out to you?
Yeah, I remember my first day, I had a horrific cold and it was pouring with rain. And I remember putting my name in at the gate, this huge gate going through, really intimidating, essentially. And I was left standing in the rain for 45 minutes, just waiting for someone to come and get me. No keys. So essentially just locked into this space without any kind of freedom to roam, or just that really oppressive space where you suddenly recognize, I guess, the value of being in control and having the freedom to move, I guess, that liberty. I remember really vividly walking in on the first day, walking into a wing. So I was told to go down and see somebody. And as I stepped foot, the noise, you know, whether that's the keys, whether that's the doors, it was just a really noisy space. And it was just seemed really disorganized. It had that real smell. You kind of get it in hospitals sometimes, that real kind of,
Yeah.
you know, mass feeding kind of smell. And people just swamped me. People were just like, they just literally, I had 15, 20 guys around me, all asking questions about why they'd been recalled or what their problems were, just desperately just trying to get some kind of information from me. And I didn't have a notebook. I learned that very quickly. Take a notebook with you. But yeah, it was, I think that was the bit that stood out for me, the kind of chaos, but also the staff, you know, like the rules are different in prison. Not so much, you know, hopefully getting a bit better now, but I just remember the outward racism, the outward sexism, the othering of people on such a massive level, where if you didn't have a black and white uniform on, you were not legitimate, I guess. And I remember being really aware of what I was wearing. So obviously wearing, you know, very, you know, high shirts, and making sure that as a young woman, I was kind of covered up. And I remember really clearly going into an officer saying, come into this office. And he got me into the office. And there were probably about 9 prison officers there. And he got me to stand in the room and to turn around. And then he said, just look at you. Do you think that you're dressed appropriately for working in prison? And I just felt absolutely tiny as an individual, and not really understanding. You know, I'd made sure that everything, I guess, was as professional as it could be. And I just said, I just want to speak to Mr. Smith. And he said, Mr. Smith doesn't live here. So I was trying to get to a prisoner. And I went back to my computer, trying to find it. Definitely Mr. Smith is on D wing, went back down. So 4 times I went down and asked for Mr. Smith. And on the last time, this officer laughed at me and said, the thing is, there's a Smith here, but there's no Mr. Smith. He said, you need to remember, we don't respect these people. And at that point, I just thought, that is just so wrong. That is just so wrong. So yeah, it just had a different rule book. Prison had a different rule book, you know, in terms of my experience at that point. And I just said, you know, this isn't a place where people feel included or feel that they belong or feel that they would even want to belong to a system when you're treating me like this, let alone the people that are living here. So yeah, they were my first impressions.
I've got the bin met.
Do you find that, well, I guess from what you've just said, it makes it quite clear that maybe there is a bit of sexism in there as well with prisoners. But I mean, in terms of you as an outsider coming in and working in this space, did you find that there was a lot of that this space was generally dominated by males in general? I wonder if there was any kind of discomfort from you coming in as a young woman trying to make these changes or get into this line of work, but you felt some kind of resistance or treatment that wasn't quite what you expected,
Mm.
just because you were a woman compared to the other people who were doing the exact same thing or similar thing to you?
Yeah, I mean, I've always had male friends. I've always been around a lot of men, I think, in terms of my life. So there was sexism, absolutely. And it was overt. It's toxic masculinity at its worst, I guess. It's, you can't be weak, you can't be vulnerable. These the culture dictates that you have to be tough, you have to be macho, you can't cry, and if you do, ultimately that's the kind of a weakness. And so when people are cutting people down from hangings or seeing serious self-harm, there's no space for staff or prisoners really to feel vulnerable or articulate that, because that isn't what's done in prison. And so what I've seen over the last kind of 2 decades is that the people, and probably even before that, people have just bottled up all of this trauma, and they haven't got any space to discuss that. And that's what we're changing, I guess, in terms of the work we're doing. I think in terms of being a woman, I reflect a lot on it really. And I think if I wasn't a woman, I wonder whether I would be here. I think there's something about being a woman that has really helped me in terms of my career, that nurturing side, that safety in some senses. I very much not used my womanhood, but there's certainly stuff about that. I can articulate that I love people, for example, or I can articulate that I care, and that isn't seen as something that I'm not under that toxic masculinity. So in some senses, it's liberated me to be the person that I want to be. But at the same time, I think what I see is that women that are in black and white uniform are in a very different space. Officers would have a very different lived experience than I would as someone who's coming in from an outside perspective. So yeah, it's twofold, I guess.
Um, you also mentioned about the trip to Norway and going over there and seeing that the drastic change in the way that the prisons were set up there. And I think it'd be interesting to go into a little bit about some of those changes that you did see that were vastly different from what you saw in the UK, just to paint a bit of picture around what other people are doing and what is possible.
Yeah, so I think the first one is just that the relationships that people build. So prison staff get a degree in terms of their qualifications, so they're very much versed in terms of criminology and law and psychology. They've got a much more greater understanding on relationships and building professional relationships. So firstly, you see a lot more engagement. I think the environment itself, so Halden prison, for example, is a high security prison. It is designed specifically to almost take away that sense of prison. So there's no bars on the windows. You can see trees from your rooms. So they're not cells, they're rooms. There's obviously a very large wall around Halden Prison, but because they've designed it in such a way, at no point can you look out of a room and see the wall. So it's still a prison, absolutely, but it's clean. People have their private space, they have their own showers, they have conjugal visits, they have private time with their loved ones. I guess there's that element of it. I think the biggest thing for me with Norway, and the three messages that always rung true no matter really what member of staff I spoke to, is firstly, who do we want as our neighbours? Do we want people that are monsters, addicts, really, really struggling with their lives, unable to regulate their emotions? Do we want that, or do we want people that ultimately are citizens and taxpayers and parents, and good people? So there's something about that lesson. I think there's also that idea that prison is not a place to punish, but it is a place where you live out your sentence. So the punishment is your sentence. And then from the point in which you enter prison, it's about your rehabilitation, it's about your growth. So it's not about risk in the same kind of way that I guess it would be in England. It's not about people are kind of dangerous and violent. It's very much about what are people's needs, and what resources do we have in order to fulfill those needs. So I think that's the second one. The third one is, I guess, that principle of normality. So what we know is that if we create abnormal conditions, we get abnormal behaviour. And Norway have very much, not in all of their prisons, but in terms of the three that I spent the most time in, they create this environment that is like home in some senses, like a safe space.
And it may not be like home, I guess, for some of the people going in there, because their home may be quite traumatic and unsafe. But they give you a taste of what it feels like to be a citizen, and what it feels like to be safe, and what it feels like to have good relationships. And then you can sense that there's this real thirst then to be in the community, that gap between prison and the community is not massive. You know, we talk about this cliff edge in prisons, that you come out of prisons in England and you just literally just walk off a cliff, because the gap is just so different in terms of a space where you can't shower, you can't eat when you want to, you can't, you know, contact your families when you want to an environment in Norway which is so normal. You don't see a prison. You know, I just saw a community, I saw a church and a shop where they bought their own stuff. They have their own space, they have their own kind of apartments that they share with maybe 3 or 4 people. They can walk around the forest, because there's like a forest in Bastoy prison anyway. It is beautiful. It is a beautiful place. And a lot of people say, well, how can that be a deterrent? But it's got the best reoffending rates in the world. You know, it's 16% compared to our 60, 50, 60% that we've got here. So the deterrent argument doesn't work. The idea that it costs loads of money, you know, Bastoy was pretty much self-sustaining. So whilst some prisons do cost a lot of money, the philosophy of Norway is you invest in people, and then we create better citizens, and then we don't have crime, and we don't have victims. And I think for me, it's such a complex place, like Winchester maybe. You go to Norway and it's just so straightforward. It's very simple. I remember the governor, Tom, just say, it's just really simple. It's just about humanity. And I kind of think the minute you strip it all back, it suddenly just becomes so much clearer. And so we for 3 years, I pretty much investigated what it was about that environment that promoted growth, not only in the prisoners, but with the staff as well, and families. And we did that in 3 prisons. We found exactly the same principles. And then with that, all our strategy really is in England is we go into a prison, we understand the needs of that community, and we brighten those principles. So it's not about targets, KPIs, outcomes. They'll all sort themselves out. It's about building trust, building meaning, helping people to cope, connecting with nature, thinking about things larger than ourselves, whether that's spirituality, whether that's faith. It's about being the person you want to be, and then working and then creating that meaning so people feel that they are worth something and that they can contribute to society.
It's literally simple when you say it that way, right? Just treating people as people and kind of changing that mindset from us versus them, or that we're inferior, we're superior and they're inferior, and they kind of get the feeling that they're less than and they're not kind of worthy of treatment or rehabilitation or being a human being. And so naturally the behavior is just, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy kind of situation, right? It's like, if you can treat me this way, then I'm going to show up this way. And they don't really come outside of that story until someone really believes in them to point them in a different direction. Actually, this is what's possible for you. And then they start to think, oh, maybe this is interesting that someone's seeing this potential in me. Let me explore that with a bit of curiosity. And it may not happen overnight, but over time, continually working with them, I guess that's what leads to long-term success and them not reoffending. And it'd be like, I don't know if you've got any memories that come to mind of kind of conversations you've had with people when going in, that have kind of stuck with you or been profound.
Oh, there's so many. Goodness me, I'd be here all day. There's so many, but there's a couple. Let me do one kind of resident and one member of staff maybe. I remember
Yeah.
the
By
first
the way,
time
if you just sorry, just before you go into the story, if you just move the mic a little bit further out from your mouth,
yeah,
then it hopefully should crack a bit less. Let's
is
see.
that all right?
Go on. Go for it.
Uh,
Yeah, perfect. Go for it.
so I think there's 2 stories there. I think maybe one with staff, and it's a very small one maybe, and then one with residents, I guess. So we create something called the Growth Project. So we recruit prisoners on board with our projects to research the environment and to be basically prison reformers in prison.
Is that
And
the Growth Alliance?
so it's a growth project. The Growth Alliance is more a network of people outside. So whether that's kind
Oh,
of
got it.
corporate, third sector, basically communities, everyone that is going to be part of, I guess, the revolution in a broader sense. But growth projects are very much about the people in the prison, getting them involved in coming up with solutions to transform their culture. And I remember we did a community fair. So we designed a community fair which was all about the principles of growth, so meaning, purpose, building relationships, helping people cope, getting people to learn new things, all the things that basically lead to self-actualization, I would say. So we designed that, but it was a charity event, because one of our teachers had lost someone due to cancer. And it was an environment where at that time, it was the first time the prison had ever been fully open. So people had been all let out of their cells into the grounds. And I remember the day before, it was all about overcoming obstacles. So it's about how do we overcome obstacles, and by practicing that, that's what helps us move away from crime. So if you can get an obstacle and you can get over it, you can build the resilience that you need in order to live a crime-free life. So the day before, we got intelligence that this, due to the gangs that were in the prison, it was going to be a bloodbath. That's what the intelligence was. And I remember sitting with the governors, and they're saying, okay, so what do we want to do? Do we want to pull this, or are we going to do it? And I just remember that heavy weight of responsibility and thinking, do you know what? I trust these men that they're going to be okay. And I trust these staff that it's going to be okay. So I kind of stood up on a bench with a mic and all of the like 600 men in front of me. And I was just like, this is an event for you. You know, we have done this for you because we care about you and because we love you and we want the best for you. And there were lots of different things. So there was a band playing and there was circus skills, so overcoming obstacles around fears. There was like spiders that people had to hold. And it was all this kind of team building, community building kind of intervention, I guess. And we got to end of it. 52 of the prisoners supported me in delivering it. So I didn't do it on my own. We had staff and prisoners helping us, and the growth team were those people. And we got to the end of the day, and we had no kind of spice attacks. So spice is really bad in prisons at the time. So a kind of really horrific drug that just absolutely wipes you out. So we had massive spice issues at the time. We had no spice attacks. We had no violence. We had literally nothing, because for that day we manufactured a safe space where people could just be together, and we researched it and asked everyone who took part how much they loved it, and the findings were just incredible in terms of how they built new relationships, how it was the first time they came out of their cell for 9 months. It was just absolutely fantastic. But the measure of success for me is when someone says to me, today I didn't feel I was in a prison. And that is it for me. I think we fucking got it when we've got to a stage where we have created even a moment, even a minute, where people feel free enough to be themselves. And that was significant. And I remember Cam, who is one of our growth team, he's now a digital consultant working for me now. He did a speech right at the end, and he stood up, the leader that he is, absolute creative, and was just like, we did this, we have created something really special. And this will remain the history of I guess the prison that we were in. So I think through empowering and that equality and that teamwork, we created something really lovely in that day. And for months, people were just talking about it. For months, the figures, they do drop, because that's treatment effect, that ultimately we can't maintain that culture every day. But that was a turning point in terms of the identity of that prison. It's not a place of harm and violence. It is a place where you can be the person you want to be. And we see you and we hear you and we want the best for you. So that's one. The other one's much shorter. And I don't know why it's come to mind, because it's a tiny memory really, but I guess it says a lot. There was a prison officer, his name was James, and he refused to call prisoners by their surname. So I guess it links a little bit to my Winchester story. He does call them by their surname. So he refused to call them by their first name. And I met him early doors in the project and just talked about, what might be the benefits of calling someone by their first name, and, just slowly chipped away and persevered for pretty much 18 months with this guy, just, slowly just challenging in a very informal, loving, humorous way. And the last day he was there, he went to go to another prison, and he just said, I just want to thank you for everything you've done. You've really helped me grow and develop. And he said, I just need to let you know that Dan wanted you down on, I don't know, Mercia wing, which was one of the wings that we had. And I said, who's Dan? He said, he's a prisoner. I said, what's his surname? And everything went really quiet. He said, I don't know. And I was just like, yes, we've done it. We've absolutely done it. And I kind of thought that was my little mic drop, where I just thought, for one person, just to shift in that way
Yeah.
to such a level was just really beautiful. So those are the measures of success. You know, it's not necessarily about the big stuff, but it's also about the little stuff.
They're massive, and obviously they've stuck with you for a reason. They both seem like big turning points, both from a prisoner standpoint and then from the staff standpoint as well, and changing perspectives on both sides. Do you like what would you say are the biggest misconceptions that people have about prisoners versus what they're actually like when you have interactions with them? Because you've said that you went to, if I remember correctly, in one of our previous conversations, you went to one of the prisons in Birmingham, which were like one of the most difficult ones to overturn, and you ended up forming some great relationships there. So tell me a bit more about that.
I've learned a lot. I think I've learned a lot about people, and I guess incarcerated people would certainly be would certainly be that. I think Norway taught me to not see prisoners or offenders or criminals or addicts or whatever, just to see people that have got problems or people that have made mistakes. So now when I step back into prisons, having done Norway and experienced that, I don't see their offence. I don't want to know their offence. I work with a lot of people and I still don't know what their offence is, and it's irrelevant to me, because it's about the measure of their character and it's about who they are. So I see just some incredible people. I see people that have been just utterly traumatized. You know, what we know is that 2 out of 3 have experienced some form of trauma as a child. We know that half of them have got the literacy age of a 9-year-old. We know 8 out of 10 of them have got mental health issues, neurodiversity. So autism, ADHD is rife in terms of the population in prison versus the community. What we know is that people have come from the product of inequality and the product of poor systems, I guess, whether that's education, care, criminal justice, has in some senses led people to a place that is a prison. And it's about understanding, appreciating where they're at in that. And I see resilience, therefore, you know, if I'd gone through what they'd gone through, I don't know if I'd be able to have picked myself up in the same way they do. So people in prison have taught me resilience to such a massive degree. I've never experienced such kindness and respect and loyalty than I have in prison with people that are incarcerated. And that may sound really weird. I've never felt unsafe. I remember something kicking off on a wing and a prisoner literally just kind of scooping me up and just getting me out and saying, you know, you're like our president, I'm your bodyguard kind of thing. And, you know, I've always felt very protected by the people based on my relationships with them. So I think there's something there that I've learned so much from them about resilience and compassion and respect. I think the other thing, which is across prisons, whether it's staff or prisoners, we absolutely underestimate what they're capable of doing. We talk a lot about the bad things that they're capable of doing in our risk assessments that absolutely consume our everyday practice, but we don't fully appreciate what people can do, you know. And I think saying to them, you know, you're either going to be in a warehouse or you're going to do construction, it's not a problem. They're not problematic, you know, or, you know, it's not I guess a dig at those occupations, but it's not necessarily what people want and what gives them meaning and passion and that desire that they have to be a better person. And the minute you give them that, they absolutely run with it, they grab it. And it's hard, you know, from all the people that we support. We have unconditional support for the people that we have are part of the growth project, kind of growth team family. So they can always come to us if they reoffend, if they've relapsed. No matter what happens, we're here. They can pick up a phone and I'll be on the other end of it, or one of our team will be. That unconditional regard is so important in terms of humanity. But when I went into prison, I wanted to support people to grow. I never thought people would support me to grow. And so when I came out of the first prison we did the pilot in, I had all these guys that were being released and ringing me up saying, I want to work for your organization. I want to be a volunteer. I want to be an intern. I want to come and work for you on projects. You know, we've got, you know, probably 60% of our organization have got lived experience of prison, and they enrich our work and they make it real, and they pull us down when we become too academic, or they recognize and appreciate, you know, that some of our solutions aren't quite right because we haven't been there and done it. So for me, it's that. For me, it's like, if we could just think, do you know what? A drug dealer could be an amazing entrepreneur if we just transferred those skills across. He can negotiate, he can convince, he can communicate, he can persuade, he can work very intensively throughout the night. They are the skills of an entrepreneur, and we can create that. And then in some senses, not only do that, but they can then be part of the solution. So Cam is a great example of that. Another guy called David Hayes, he's a nomadic paddler, so he's on social media, so he's basically smashing world records in paddleboarding in order to raise awareness around prison reform. I met him in a cell in a prison, and he's now doing some incredible stuff as part of this movement that we're working towards. So yeah, I've just talked forever there, but ultimately for me, it's about not underestimating people, seeing them for who they are, looking at their strengths and nurturing them. And I guess what I've learned from them. So it's humbling. It's a humbling experience working in prisons.
They've all got stories as well. When I look at each individual, just generally day to day, I see stories, not labels. And it's interesting to understand, like you said about, you know, you studied or were interested in psychology right at the beginning. Like what leads people to a particular action? Like something has happened in their story that has led them to decide that this is the next best course of action for them based on everything that's happened to them up to that point. And I think we can quickly disregard that and isolate the very end action or result they've done, and then tag that as the label in terms of who they are and what they're capable of, and the way they should be treated, versus actually they were someone before they went and did what they did, whatever that may be. And so yeah, I just applaud you for seeing that. It's such a fresh perspective to see people as people, as simple as that sounds, but that is where our connection is at the heart and soul level, to understand we're actually all the same, and to be treated that way is where the real change can happen, because then your guard is down, you're not defensive, and you're not being treated as someone else who's less than, basically. um
I think
do
there's
you
something
find
there.
do you
Oh,
do you
sorry.
find well, sorry, go on. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, I think for
Yeah, no,
me,
go on, go on.
yeah, so for me, in terms of psychology, when we think about interventions, we always think about what's wrong with the person. So they've got deficits in emotions or thinking skills, and it's all their fault, it's their responsibility. And I think the way in which we've changed the way in which we see that is that people do the best with the resources they have. And when you see people in prison, you readily understand and recognize that they did not have the resources to deal with an altercation. They didn't have the resources to financially deal with their lives, and so therefore gambled, and so therefore committed fraud, whatever. It's not negating that they have a responsibility, because they absolutely do. They own their decisions. But I think there's something we forget about, the context and what are we responsible for. And so every time, you know, that there's issues in terms of our society, whether that's othering or, you know, hate crime, or, you know, having a pop at the woke culture, whatever it may be, it's about what role do we play in it. You know, we all have a role in it. We all have, you know, we all have a part of the solution as well. So I think that was I abandoned a little bit psychology and went over to criminology, because it just enabled us to think more clearly about those contextual factors, I guess, rather than just saying you're wrong, you're broken, and we have to fix you. Well, no, we don't. You know, psychologists don't fix people. People fix people, and we need to give them the confidence to fix themselves. So yeah, that was a changing point, I think.
And how do we get, I guess, because you said you're working in the education system to raise awareness so that people don't eventually end up in prisons, because it's always fascinating to envision a society where prisons in their current form don't have to exist, and that, you know, they're abolished altogether eventually. And if that is ever a possibility, I guess it would start by raising awareness and educating at an earlier point in that person's life, so that they're making decisions from a completely different place, and not alluding to committing a crime. So what does that look like? What has that relationship been like with you and the education system?
Yeah, so I mean, it's been challenging because funding is harder than ever. You know, teachers haven't got notebooks for their kids at the moment in some schools, so getting programs in terms of the programs that we deliver has been really challenging. But we have started. So last year we've worked in schools, so educational settings, which are basically targeting people that are at risk of crime, so some kind of crime prevention, I guess, strategy. And in some senses, it's really simple that we are building resource. So if you think about those kind of key principles of growth, we're just brightening them when they're a child rather than brightening them when they're an adult and they've kind of made their mistakes and they've fucked up along the way. So it has been really interesting. And I kind of think even, we've worked with kind of 13, 14-year-olds. I think it even needs to be sooner than that. But what's really fascinating is that when we have our guys and girls with lived experience go and talk to schools, scared straight programs don't work. We know that. It teaches kind of compliance, boot camps, that kind of stuff, freaking them out about prison. You don't want to go there. It's really, people get cut up and people hang themselves and all of this kind of stuff. We know that generates fear, and it is short term. It's not about growth. So it's more about just educating people. And I think the great thing is that our team go into prisons and they talk to the pupils and they build a relationship with them, and they say, oh, just to let you know, I've served 15 years in prison. And it scrambles your mind, because I remember someone saying, but he doesn't look like a prisoner. And you think, well, what does a prisoner look like then? But it is a really powerful message that when you meet these inspirational legends that we have on our team, they absolutely confuse people, because everything that they ever thought about what a prisoner looked like or how they behaved or what they have to say about the world is just completely shot out of the water, really. So yeah, we want to expand our work. We're creating a community interest company, which is going to hopefully enable us to get more kind of grants so that we can support schools more readily. So yeah, our plan is really reform starts in schools and it starts in communities. And then, obviously it starts in prisons as well. But I think if we can raise awareness and say, do you know what, let's just go for rehabilitation. Let's just focus on that. And the way in which we do that is by creating a safe environment, treating people with humanity. If we can get the public on board with that, slowly but surely through campaigns and all the stuff that we do, then to win the vote, you need to rehabilitate, and therefore decarceration takes care of itself. So that's our kind of game plan when it comes to the mass incarceration issue we currently have, and it's growing currently. So yeah, that's the kind of stuff that we do.
And do you find there's a particular group of people that are targeted in terms of the law, the way the law is set up in the UK anyway, that end up in prison because they fall under a particular type of behavior, and those are the types of people that tend to fall into a particular category, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, so David Lammy did a really big review on disproportionality within prisons, and he went through not only prisons, the whole of the criminal justice kind of system, and found that there was a huge disproportionality in terms of young black men, minority groups, and you've got to think about it. It's little things like, I guess you learn in criminology that where do we have our CCTV cameras? We have them in high populated cities. We don't have them in suburbia. And so therefore we're only watching certain people, and therefore we're only catching certain people. Louis Lequant, who's an incredible criminologist, he talks about ultimately we're punishing the poor, we're scooping up all of those people. He talks about this kind of net widening, that we kind of scoop up all the people that we don't want, and then with that, through legislation, a classic example is crack cocaine in terms of America, absolutely focusing on black communities rather than, I guess, the middle class, white middle class that were using cocaine but got a completely different sentence for it. So they're scooping up the people that they see as problematic in their communities, and with that, not only sending them to prison, but then obviously once they've been in prison, the likelihood of them reintegrating back into society is really difficult. You know, you can't vote when you get out. In America, you can't vote for, I think, 10 years when you get out of a prison. You know, what I think it's something like 1 in 3 young black men are either in prison, on parole, or probation of some kind in America. You know, that's just bonkers. So I think there's so much going on there, and there are things that are being done. I think, you know, service, you know, getting people with lived experience involved in the solution. I think that's definitely something that's trending. We're involved in lots of things linked to that, but it needs something fundamental to change. And I have real faith in our youth. I have really real faith in our generation that is going to be a lot more focused on inclusion, diversity, embracing difference, to really be the pioneers in that. And I guess my job is about how can we create a legacy? How can we get, you know, we get a lot of young people at university who are activists that join part of our internship program, and my main goal with that is to grow people that are going to change this world. You know, that's the strategy. So yeah, I'm not sure if that answered your question, but yeah.
It does, yeah. No, believing in the potential that people have inside them, and I don't think the education system really does that. In a multitude of ways. I mean, we're still following a program that was built a long time ago in the 1800s for factory workers, just having to learn certain sets of skills that are homogenous across every single school district for X amount of years until 18, and then you're expected to know which direction to go in. But the thing is, you're not even interested in half that stuff because it's not led by curiosity and nurturing that particular person's potential, but rather fitting them into a box, and you've got to match up your grades or your behavior to what everyone else is doing, so that we can create this mass list of people that are quote unquote successful because they've gone through a curriculum. But that doesn't mean it's going to help that person. It's just a standard program to get everyone onto the same level, essentially. But that's not what works. And it reminds me of a quote by Einstein, you know, measuring the success of a fish by its ability to climb a tree. It's just never going to happen. It's going to think it's a failure. But as soon as you put it in the ocean, it's in its natural habitat and it will thrive. And so there are a couple of schools that do stuff like that, like Montessori and forgetting the other one now, Waldorf, I think. There are other ones, Rudolf Steiner schools, that kind of stuff. But that's I don't, you know, that's not the standard practice. It's not people going, you know, families in the public anyway that are exposed to that kind of system. But it's proven to work because it's nurtured and built around each individual. And so, yeah, I think having ambassadors like at different points in the education system would definitely, I guess, definitely help, because it's not like we're going to overturn that whole curriculum overnight.
No.
But you know, working with it where it's at, I guess, is where the solution is, right?
Yeah. I think that the other thing is, I think having grown into kind of entrepreneurialism a little bit, at least trying my best, what you learn is that if you can't do something, you subcontract. You know, if I can't do my accounts this month, if I haven't got skills in that, an entrepreneur would be like, I'm not going to waste my time doing that because I've got to lead something that's significant, that is my passion and where I'm in my element. Whereas when I grew up, I had to be good at everything. You know, you had to be good at all of these things. And you kind of, you know, I talk to my children, you know, 15 and 12 now, and say, do you know what? It's not about that. It's about you realizing what do you want to do? What brings you meaning? And the rest will follow, because you're going to be able to sub it out some way, you know, if you need to. So don't worry if you don't want to do Spanish. It's okay. You know, the world is not going to fall down if you fail your Spanish GCSE, because if you never intend to learn Spanish, and if you do and change your mind, we can do that now, can't we? We can do it online. We can do it in much more flexible ways than we did when maybe I was a child. So yeah, it gets me that we are just sucking the creativity. Robinson talks about that, doesn't he, in terms of takes the creativity out of these amazing children. You know, my daughter is such a nonconformist, and she is beautiful and creative and, you know, just absolutely brilliant. I wouldn't have it any other way. And it's always about, well, hang on, can we get her into this box? And I'm like, she doesn't, non-conformists, our leaders, the people that have done well in the world didn't conform. So that says something about our prison system, doesn't it? If we've got non-conformists in there, we've just got to rewire them a little bit and support them in that. And we've absolutely made it in so many ways.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. Non-conformists is like, they're the people that shake up the status quo and think about what else is possible outside the given conditions and situations that they're in right now, letting their imagination run wild and thinking about what would be possible with the potential of the world in general and themselves. It's just fueling that excitement within that person to think about what could be possible, what if. So yeah, I'm also curious about like what you're excited about with the work that you're doing now in terms of the future, like where you're headed and what that's going to look like.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I wish I knew. I'm very much of the opinion that as long as we keep our vision central, then what comes will emerge. And that's really hard. And I appreciate that leading an organization where I say that, my staff are just like, but what's the plan? And opportunities have come our way. And I do think the universe gives us things and puts things on our table that we could kind of do. So we're doing some really exciting stuff. We're doing some really exciting stuff at how we can kind of revolutionize particular experiences. So for example, electronic monitoring, we're doing some stuff around that. How could we move that into something that is really meaningful and relationship based? So that's something that is just come up, which is just, I'm learning an awful lot about. We do some incredible stuff around kind of thematic work, so research for the Inspectorate of Probation. So that's through our lived experience team. So we've done stuff on mental health, and we've done stuff on MAPA, which is kind of like how we manage people in the community that are deemed violent and high risk. So we've got a schoolwork and we want to expand that. We're doing some amazing stuff abroad in terms of leadership training. Potentially got some incredible links in terms of the US. So I was over in the US in the spring and did a conference to 200 Texan correctional wardens and directors, which, as you can imagine, was just brilliant. And I had some fantastic conversations. I think for me, I need to get more uncomfortable. I am so uncomfortable, it hurts, but I think I need to continue to push that, because you can go on Twitter and you can post something about humanity and get all the likes and reassurance that you want, but that's because the people that are following you sign up to that stuff. Who I need to talk to are the people that don't. And I guess it's about, how do we do that? How do we really utilize this idea of the Growth Alliance? How do we join up those dots to make a collective impact? How do we put on growth events, conferences, almost a little bit like kind of TED Talks? How do we start conversations in places that these conversations don't exist, and what value that could bring? I think I'm very much wanting to kind of join stuff up now and really lead and push forward with things for the first time. Our proof of concept has happened in terms of England, in terms of our growth work. We have demonstrated that by cultural transformation, you reduce social harm. So we would love to get into more prisons. We would love to be in every prison. And every approved premises and every probation office, we would want to have that level of presence, and obviously that kind of global kind of footprint that we want to kind of make. So yeah, I've got loads of ambition, but I kind of think it's just slowly but surely just seeing what emerges and seeing what opportunities come our way, and yeah, talking about it, which obviously we are doing today. So yeah.
Absolutely. Is there anyone else that that's doing this kind of work or similar in the UK or even outside of the UK?
No, I don't. I don't know anyone.
Because that's
which
crazy
is,
to me. Like
yeah, it is a little crazy.
Yeah.
There's certainly people that are doing elements of it. So there's people that are doing those short projects that could inform a growth culture. But but there isn't someone, I guess, looking at it from a real whole systems perspective. And it freaks me out a little bit just even talking about it. But I remember going over to America, and I've got an amazing colleague that we've met kind of remotely on LinkedIn during COVID, and I kind of mentor him. He's just set up a not-for-profit organization for prisons, so to create not-for-profit prisons in America and abroad. And I went to the conference with him and we had dinner, and he said, "You do know you're the only one doing this globally?" And I was like, "That can't be true." And he's like, "I've done an awful lot of research." And I'm just like, I think there are certainly leaders within the educational sector that are doing very similar stuff. The stuff you sent me was fascinating in terms of, I think there's leaders out there, but the idea that I'm on my own, I'm not on my own, because we've got an army of people that are going to help along the way. But yeah, I can't believe that for a second. I just don't think we found them yet, but we need to seek them out. We need to find them.
Yeah, because I feel like that there are pockets of work that are happening, but it needs to be a united mission, I guess, a united effort to move forward and to share ideas. Because imagine there's things that are working right now around the world, or ideas that are spreading or being implemented that we don't know about. And if we just had access to that connection or that knowledge or that wisdom or that insight, then we could easily kind of transfer that those skills across and start implementing stuff. And so yeah, that video that I sent you, that was a fascinating interview, because I found that the perspective she was coming from was reforming people through education and awakening their inner wisdom and intellect, I guess, to understand why they did what they did and what effect that eventually has, and the ripple effect of that, basically, and putting people through that process of kind of, I guess, awakening and education, so that they come out more rehabilitated and grounded in the knowledge of what happened, and so they're less likely to do it again. And I'm curious whether there is access to information like that within prisons right now, if you've seen that at all, in terms of books and resources that people can read if they choose to.
I don't know, to be honest. I don't know. I think there are books. I mean, there's libraries in every prison, and you can pretty much get any book that you kind of request. Obviously, there's some that you can't get due to, a list that prohibits some books. But our libraries are generally very safe spaces. No one ever kicks off in a library. No one ever kicks off in a chapel. It's very, very rare. I'm sure they have, but there's a reason for that, and that's because people are immersed in opportunities to learn. They're quiet, they're peaceful, they're normal to people, so they bring comfort in a way. I always remember one of the riots that took place. I can't remember which one it was, but everything got trashed except for the aquarium. They had a kind of fish aquarium on one of the wings, and it was the only thing that stayed preserved. And I think there's something about that in terms of, we really value some resources and therefore we look after them. And that extends to people. There's people that we look after just so that they can do their job, really. But no, I don't know in terms of, I think education is starting to really change. I think we're having a lot more conversations about digitalizing education, interventions, people getting tablets. So that started to roll out in 11 prisons, where you've got people in their rooms having some kind of access to education for the first time. So I'm really hopeful. You've got to think what you could achieve in a prison if we weren't too worried about this kind of hot need for retribution. If we just focused on growing people, you could create something really incredible. So people are starting to realize that writing on paper and carrying that paper to pigeonholes, for example, isn't maybe a great process anymore, and we need to think about our resources in prison. So I do think that there's a lot more stuff going on, more so than ever before. So that's exciting.
And if there's ways that people could help and reach out and take part in anything that you're doing right now, what would be the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, I would say get on our website, join the Growth Alliance, and talk about what you want to give. You know, we're very much looking at this idea of people can give anything. They can give their time, they can give you know, taster sessions at their work, they can give literally anything that they have the resources to give. And then it's the idea that we kind of pair that up with people that need it. That's the idea of the Growth Alliance. It's still not fully functioning. It was meant to launch in January, but COVID has just, you know, really caused loads of, and our work has gone crazy. So we're doing it, you know, additional to, I guess, the work that we're doing at the minute. But yeah, I think give it a few months for us to get our heads together. And I think what would be great is for us to start to have some open space discussions, to start thinking about how does everyone fit together. We've already got maybe 50, 60 people on the Growth Alliance, so people are kind of ready to rock. It's just mobilizing them now. And I guess having the energy to mobilize them, that's probably the challenge for me at the moment. But I have stepped back from being in prisons over the last couple of weeks, and that's enabled me to be a little bit more strategic. So yeah, that's an odd feeling, but it will hopefully bring with it some real changes around the Growth Alliance and the things that we really want to do more kind of globally. But yeah, get in touch, email us, talk about what you're doing. I think creating some kind of standard measure of how we could measure the impact of the things that we are all doing, that's the kind of stuff we need to be looking at. So the collective impact stuff is really interesting. Collective Impact Forum is a really interesting resource. So yeah, support us, I guess, you know, as much as possible. But yeah, and for us to support others, you know, it's not a one-way thing. We always want to try and support people where we can. So but yeah, connection and relationships is the key, isn't it? So just talk,
It
I
absolutely
guess.
is. Yeah, exactly. Coming together and being aware and spreading a message, being on the same page. Before we wrap up, I guess I want to go back to the beginning in terms of your journey a little bit, just before we close off here, in terms of whether you had any influences, positive influences, to get you into the space that you're in now, or interested in that. Like, are your parents doing kind of any activism work, or uncles or aunties, or anyone that you saw growing up, or was this just a innate desire that was already growing in you anyway?
Yeah, I didn't really growing up. I don't really know what I was doing when I was growing up, to be honest. But I think only now I kind of reflect back on those kind of influences. Obviously Nelson Mandela remains an influence. There's a academic called Frank Porporino, who is my hero. My supervisor for my master's, Adrian Needs, incredibly intelligent and supportive and nurturing. Roger Grafe was my mentor, so he died recently. So he was a film director, prison reformer, and he always said, you know, I want my last documentary to be about the work that you do. So that was really devastating in terms of just missing him dearly, in terms of his support and his advice. So yeah, I guess I'm a bit of a magpie, really. I kind of pick out people that inspire me in all different pockets of my life, whether that's academia or work. You know, Noel, who's my business manager, he inspires me. My team more broadly inspire me. David Hayes is just, and Cam Stevens again, both inspire me greatly for the work that they do. So there's incredible governors that I just think, I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you sleep with the responsibility of those, you know, those men or women, you know, in your care, on your shoulders, and do the things you do and get up every day and say, do you know what, I haven't got the resources to do this job, but I'm going to give it my all, because there's just no funding, and you know, prisons are in relatively dire space. So yeah, I went to Macedonia, I went to North Macedonia, and went to a women's prison to do I designed a women's program, which is all around growth, essentially, and moving away from crime. And they all put their best makeup on and their best clothes on, and they knitted me these little ducks for my children that had taken them like 9 months, because the prisons, you know, they had no resources whatsoever. And they've inspired me. You know, you just kind of think, you have got so little, and yet you remain hopeful, you remain grateful for the very small things. just my time with them was really precious, and I will remember that forever. Governors in Norway, there's 3, so you know, Lars, Ara, and Tom. They always say, we will be your candle in the night. You know, when it gets dark, we will be your candle in the dark. And I always draw on them and message them and say, God, help me with this. What am I doing? So yeah, I didn't have really any kind of maybe growing up. I was quite religious, so maybe spiritually influenced, I guess. I was going to join the church up until 16. So very adamant that that's what I wanted to do. I was a Baptist growing up. And then I met my husband at 16, and yeah, he was a atheist, and I got kicked out for being bad and falling in love with him. But you know, 25 years later, we're still together, and I love every bit of him. He's just the best human in the universe. So I guess I've got a lot of faith in relationships because of my relationship with Al. He shows me what a perfect relationship might be and supports me in every way. So yeah, he's probably a big inspiration as well. So I could go on forever, literally. There's just so many, but yeah, they're the ones that come to mind.
Yeah, upon reflection, it's interesting to see what role that everyone played along your journey, because in some shape or form, everyone's had an impact to get you to where you are right now. You know,
Yeah.
whether it's positive or negative, quote unquote positive or negative, right? But they've all nudged you slightly further down the path that you were supposed to go down. But that's beautiful that you met Al that early on. Like, there's
Yeah, it was lovely. The other person, actually, just before,
relationship.
Yeah, the other person, which is actually a massive influence for me, was that officer. You know, the officer that I talked about, who got me in that room and humiliated me. I built a relationship with him right at the end when I left, and we had a really great relationship. And I remember he died of cancer, and one of the governors informed me that he died, and I just cried. It was just so sad that but yeah, I think you're right, that kind of, it's not necessarily about the positive influences. You know, I've met some really challenging people and kind of killed them with kindness, but they still influence me greatly, and I kind of am open for anyone to do that, really. So I think that's important, to have that openness to say, do you know what, anyone can be my inspiration and anyone can be my teacher. It's that thirst to learn, isn't it? I think that's important.
Absolutely. Before we close off, is there anything else that you feel that's important that we haven't touched on, or that you want to speak about, that's on your heart right now?
No, I don't think so. We've covered loads. It's been really nice to reminisce and just talk. I don't think there is. It's been lovely.
That's good. No, I really enjoyed this, and I think this is definitely something that we should continue in terms of raising awareness at different points in the journey as time goes on, to just fan the flame every now and then, to bring voice to the progress that's being made, the issues that are being confronted, and the work that's continually developing as well, on different fronts as the journey. As the plot thickens and as
Yeah.
the journey continues. So thank you so much for taking the time to share everything that you've just gone through.
No worries at all. And yeah, I look forward to it. It's been lovely to talk to you. So thanks for inviting me. I feel very privileged.